I am David Barkin. I am a distinguished professor at the Metropolitan Autonomous University in Mexico City, and I'm going to be talking about food sovereignty, a strategy for generating a just future and reducing climate impacts. The point of departure for this talk is the whole question of justice, and especially environmental justice. This is a very, very important fundamental epistemological issue, because environmental justice involves not only the question of socioeconomic balance, not only the problem of equity in society, but achieving this equity without sacrificing the quality of the environment. In fact, it involves the requirement of rehabilitating and conserving the planetary system on which we all depend. The issue of food sovereignty is extraordinarily important because it poses a direct contrast with the more common and internationally accepted term food security, which according to the Food and Agricultural Organization, the FAO, exists when people have physical, social, and economic access to sufficient, safe, and nutritious food to meet their dietary needs and food preferences for an active and healthy life. Household food security is the application of this concept to the family level, with the individuals within households as the focus of concern. This concept contrasts very dramatically with food sovereignty as defined by an international organization, a social organization, which differentiates it because food security does not distinguish where food comes from or the conditions under which it is produced and distributed. National food security targets are often met by sourcing food produced under environmentally destructive and exploitative conditions and supported by subsidies and policies that destroy local food producers but benefit agribusiness. Food sovereignty emphasizes ecologically appropriated production, distribution, and consumption, socioeconomic justice, and local food systems as a way to tackle hunger and poverty and guarantee sustainable food security for all peoples. It advocates trade and investment that serve collective aspirations of society, and it promotes community control of productive resources, agrarian reform, tenure security for small-scale producers, agroecology, biodiversity, local knowledge, and the rights of peasants, women, and indigenous people and workers, social protection, and climate justice. The reality involves an extraordinary contrast between what 30% of the world's food involves. That is 30% produced by agro-industrial corporations, producing for profit and producing for international markets. This food is distributed in a way that has led to the creation of 1 billion people who are hungry, markets that systematically cannot supply their needs, and mechanisms of food production that are generating health problems, very, very serious health problems, from malnutrition to obesity, that are being noted internationally. The reality then is that the agro-industrial complex is a different ontology than the food sovereignty approach to environmental justice. the agro-industrial complex not only produces this billion people who are hungry, but produces another 500 million who perhaps are malnourished. Bad diets and malnutrition are a serious problem for public health systems and are creating massive budgetary problems and political problems around the world. Food sovereignty is a mechanism for social mobilization. Food sovereignty involves building, strengthening, and supporting communities involved in their own self-governance processes. We have identified 5 principles for community building. These 5 principles involve autonomy, which involves self-governance, and universal democracy, which involves the obligation of all people to participate in the governance procedures, and important social mechanisms that keep the communities governed in a responsible way. The second principle, solidarity, involves assuring that within communities there are no people left behind. There's no poverty in the sense that there are no people who are dramatically undernourished, that cannot meet their basic food needs, and also placing limits on the way in which individuals within the community can enrich themselves. Solidarity, though, also involves a very, very important additional element. Solidarity means alliances among communities and alliances between rural peoples and urban peoples to assure that food production for rural communities also takes into account the needs of urban populations in their regions, and perhaps on a greater scale. Solidarity also involves a regional, national, and international component, as we will see very, very shortly. The third principle involves food self-sufficiency in general, to the extent that the ecosystem allows this. Self-sufficiency, it means attending to productive structures, creating productive structures that attend basic needs of the local population, while also engaging in the fourth principle, which is productive diversification, to assure that communities have the wherewithal to interchange commodities with other communities on a regional and perhaps even on an international basis to permit them to obtain goods which they cannot produce themselves. And these goods will include not only agricultural products, but the kinds of industrial products which are now so very important for assuring a good and healthy development, including, of course, computers, cell phones, but also the cultural elements which are a fundamental part of human development. And the fifth principle is the sustainable management of regional ecosystems. The concept here of regional ecosystems is fundamental because communities cannot ignore the fact that they occupy only part of natural ecosystems. These ecosystems may be defined by a watershed, by a tropical rainforest, or even by a desert. And many communities live within a single ecosystem. And this sustainable management involves alliances among people and, importantly, collaboration for the political management and rehabilitation of these ecosystems. The food sovereignty movement has 6 pillars. These 6 pillars are focus on people, on food for people, by placing people's needs at the center of policies and insisting that food is more than just a commodity. The food sovereignty movement values food producers by supporting sustainable livelihoods and respecting the work of all food providers. Localizes food systems by reducing the distance between suppliers and consumers, rejecting of dumping of food and inappropriate food aid, resisting dependence on remote and unaccountable corporations. The 6 pillars, the 4th pillar places control at the local level, at the hand of local producers, the need for control of territories, and rejecting the privatization of natural resources. The 5th pillar is promoting knowledge and skills by building on traditional inherited knowledge systems, using research to support and pass on this knowledge, and rejecting technologies that undermine local food systems. Finally, the 6th pillar, working with nature to maximize the contributions of ecosystems, improving resilience, and rejecting energy-intensive monocultural production methods. Some of the tools for this, which we have mentioned during this talk, include agroecology, which has in itself become a very sophisticated and people-controlled mechanism for organizing food production and ecosystem management. A very, very important combination. One of the important organizations or institutions that's been created to assure this, the spread of this knowledge, has been peasant-to-peasant schools around the world, within regions, on a national basis, and internationally, to share knowledge, to share seeds, to share inputs to the extent that it is consistent with ecosystem balance and developing local inputs. The coordination of local markets is extraordinarily important, producing and assuring balance on a community level, on a regional level, and again, I must emphasize, and taking responsibility for non-rural populations, urban populations, that also must be supplied through this kind of system. The examples of this, the most vivid example is the Via Campesina, a movement which exists and a social organization that exists in more than 100 countries with 200 million members, that has promoted and implemented this strategy through community organizations and through international collaboration, and has proved that people can take seriously these principles. In Mexico, one of the organizations that is not a member of Via Campesina, but has demonstrated the ability to apply many of these principles to improve the well-being of its population and to assure ecosystem management, is the Zapatista movement, which numbers perhaps 500,000 people strong and occupies a territory somewhat like the country Holland or the Netherlands. On a political level, the Brazilian program implemented at the beginning of the century, the end of last century, by the Workers' Party under Luiz Inácio da Silva, Lula, created a zero hunger program which has been extraordinarily influential and powerful in promoting local production and assuring its distribution, national distribution of food to eliminate the worst scourges of malnutrition in Brazil. Hopefully, this program will not be terminated under the new regime that has come about by the golpe de Estado in Brazil during the past few months. And finally, the example of the Cuban Revolution, which over its long history has, in spite of the United States economic embargo, been extraordinarily important in trying to assure food sufficiency for the population in spite of being a resource-poor island. It has encouraged an extraordinary effort in urban agriculture and implementing agroecology techniques which are an example worldwide. In this way, then, what we are attempting to do in this talk is show that food sovereignty is a useful strategy for generating a just future and reducing climate impacts. Thank you very much.